The Biden administration is reinstating the Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy. This comes after the Supreme Court found the administration's suspension of the program violated federal law. But President Biden has long argued the policy cannot be implemented without the Mexican government's approval. Under the program, U.S. asylum seekers are required to wait in Mexico while their cases are reviewed by immigration courts here in the U.S. For more, I want to bring in CBS News immigration reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Camilo, great to have you on. So the Remain in Mexico policy has officially been reinstated as of midnight on Wednesday. But what is the current timeline for actually returning asylum seekers to Mexico?
Good evening, Lana. According to an internal Department of Homeland Security memo that we obtained, U.S. immigration officials were instructed early this morning to start the process of reinstating this Trump administration border program known as Remain in Mexico. The memo says that the Department of Homeland Security is working to implement this reinstatement of this policy as expeditiously as possible, but it does note, and this is very important, Lana, that it all hinges on the Mexican government agreeing to accept migrants returned by the U.S., as well as the establishment of the necessary infrastructure. And the former point is very important, Lana, because when the Trump administration instituted this program back in 2019, it had to secure an informal agreement for the Mexican government to accept non-Mexican migrants returned by the U.S. because the migrants that would be enrolled in this program are not Mexican. They would be from Central America and other parts of Latin America like Venezuela, Cuba, and Brazil. So now we will just have to wait and see whether the Mexican government will agree again to have migrants in its territory, while they wait for the U.S. immigration proceedings.
So, Camilo, what happens then if they don't agree? Because last week, the Mexican government said it had not officially been notified about the potential revival of the Remain in Mexico policy. So what is Mexico saying now, and could it pursue legal efforts to stop the U.S. from returning asylum seekers? Because, as you say, these are not Mexican citizens. They are coming from other countries and are being told to stay in Mexico.
That's the question of the day, Lana. We know that the Mexican Foreign Ministry said last night that they were informed of the Supreme Court's decision that refused to stop the revival of this program, and that they are exchanging information with the Biden administration to see if they can form some kind of compromise or agreement. We do know, however, that they have called the potential revival of this policy a, quote, unilateral American action, but it is important to note that they said the same thing back in 2019 when the Trump administration started returning asylum seekers back to Mexico. They also called it a unilateral Trump administration measure, and despite that, they accepted more than 70,000 non-Mexican migrants under that Remain in Mexico policy during the Trump administration. So this is not only a significant judicial setback for the Biden administration, just one of several in recent days, but it is also a disappointing outcome for advocates who strongly denounced this policy during the Trump administration, because many of these migrants, as you know, Lana, found themselves stuck in squalid tent camps in dangerous Mexican border cities, some of which the U.S. government warns Americans not to visit because of rampant crime, homicides, and turf wars between rival cartels.
So let's continue on that thread. Camilo, what happens to these migrants once they're in Mexico?
Sure. So under the Trump administration, migrants who were enrolled in the Migrant Protection Protocols, that is the official name for Remain in Mexico, they were given a notice to appear in immigration court, but they were sent back to Mexico. So they would wait in Mexican border towns for the U.S. court hearings, but these proceedings would take months and even years. And they would only be allowed to enter the U.S. to attend those court hearings before an immigration judge. If they lost their cases, which the majority of these migrants did, they would be ordered deported on paper, even though they were in Mexico. That meant they would not be allowed to enter the U.S. And if they were granted asylum, they would be allowed to stay in the U.S. on a permanent basis. But only 1% of the migrants enrolled in this program were actually able to secure U.S. asylum during the Trump administration, and that is a concern for advocates because they believe that the very low number stems from the fact that many of these asylum seekers were unable to attend their court hearings because some of them were kidnapped or they didn't have adequate transportation in Mexico. Many of them gave up on their cases and returned back home to Central America or to their home countries because they didn't have a way to provide for their families in northern Mexico.
Camilo, the lawsuit that was filed in both Texas and Missouri that's at the center of the Supreme Court's argument claims that the Biden administration illegally ended the Remain in Mexico program. Tell us a little bit about that argument.
Sure. So for context, Lana, during President Biden's inauguration day, the Biden administration suspended this program and stopped returning migrants to Mexico. Then in June, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas formally terminated the program known as Remain in Mexico. Texas and Missouri have both challenged these terminations and alleged that the Biden administration did not follow administrative law when it ended this program and that it failed to consider what they believe to be the benefits of the policy, which in their eyes includes the fact that when this policy was implemented, the number of border apprehensions along the U.S.-Mexico border decreased dramatically. So they believe that this policy had a deterrent effects on would-be migrants, and they believe that the Biden administration failed to consider that benefit. And the federal judge in Texas overseeing this case agreed with these Republican-led states and now has required the Biden administration to reinstate this policy in quote, good faith until it can detain all asylum seekers in the U.S. So this is something that the Biden administration is greatly concerned about because now the Supreme Court has refused to stop this judge's order.
All right, Camilo, thank you.
Thanks, Lana.